I wanted to focus this video on functions in canister sets for Bionicle. And I think if you were somebody who got into Bionicle in its latter half, 2006 through 2009, the Inika years, for lack of a better term, I think you might not care too much. Hell, even if you got into Bionicle in 2005, you may not care that much about functions because I don't think they're terribly important that year. But from 2001 through 2003 specifically, I do think functions play a pretty important role. Bionicle sort of attacked the toy scene in 2001 from many angles, not only as collectible, tradable, buildable figures, but figures that could be a learning moment, right? To teach you how gears can interact with each other and bevel around corners. And obviously with the Rahi, you get a ton of other functions outside of that too, which are a blast, not the focus of this video. But it's also important because of the relationship between those functions and the game that is played with those functions, the mask game. And I've made videos where I talk about that game specifically in my deep dive series. That'll be linked at the end of the video. That said though, the reason they're important in the early years is because LEGO introduces this game and then near immediately subverts it. And I have talked in the past about why I think this was actually a really smart move. However, it's almost like a path of no return. Here's the thing. The mask game from 2001 is played in a way where the Toa all are, roughly speaking, about equivalent to each other when they play the game, at least out of the box. Obviously, you could combine parts from one Toa to another. That's encouraged. And yeah, there are definitely certain scenarios where certain weapons do a better job against certain masks. But overall, when you have the set in hand, Pohatu, Liwa, Gali, etc., they're, for the most part, off the shelf, going to be equally or near equally effective against any other Toa off the shelf. However, against the Rahi, you're at a very clear disadvantage for a number of reasons. For one, most of the Rahi have two masks, so you have to defeat them essentially twice. They're bigger, and depending on how you decide to play the game, that can make it harder for you to hit the Rahi effectively because of the range of your weapons, whatever you want to consider, right? But kids playing it, they don't care about rules, they don't care about that. They just want to knock masks off. They want characters that attack each other. Hell, they're probably going to play the game past when the masks get knocked off and overkill the Toa or the Rahi or whatever. No, what I find amazing about the design of this is how much effort, how much thought, how much research and development went into designing this system. And some of it may just be a happy accident, but at the very least, how consistent it is. And you get into 2002 with the introduction of the Borak. The Borak subvert the mask game. It's their main thing, right? Why is that? Again, I've touched on this, and essentially it is my belief that the Borak are doing one of two things. First, it's just a really cool function, right? The Borak head function obviously appears in 2 years. It appears in 2002, 2003 in the Borak and the Borak Cal. And it's a fun function. It also really goes quite well with the fact that the characters can also roll into a ball, and that's cool too. Makes it easy to carry them around in school. But that's also why it's important, right? 2001 Bionicle can be described in one word, a phenomenon, because that's what it was. Bionicle was unlike basically anything else out there on store shelves, in customers' kids' hands. And I think that was really sort of a beautiful time for the franchise. Clearly, I mean, LEGO knows it was too, but it's also worth noting that everything coalesced in the design of these characters and how they interacted to play this game a very specific way. When the Borak came out, they destroy the game. They're so much harder for the Toa to defeat. It is possible the Borak have a weak spot on them, and I won't get into that here because, again, I've talked about it. Check out my playlist. Point being, though, the Borak are designed to be more difficult for the Toa to defeat because they're not meant for kids to battle with Toa. That's the point, right? Essentially, the borak sell themselves. Think of it like this. If you're a kid on a playground at school, you might be really good at the Bionicle game. Maybe you've come up with a specific build of certain parts from specific characters that make it really easy for you to just defeat all your opponents. You found the strategy that works best on your school's playground. You found the meta, whatever. 2002 comes along and you're not the first to buy the borak. Maybe you didn't even hear about them yet, but somebody else shows up at your school with one and they're just dominating. What does that make you want to do, right? If you can't compete, you now want the thing that beats everybody else. You spent so much time invested in, again, that strategy. And I don't imagine this happened much, not at least with kids. I don't imagine there are kids out there like really strategizing about the mass game, but I don't know. I don't live in 2001 anymore. That said, though, the borak, just destroy it. That's the point, right? You have to get a borak to fight a borak. The borak are designed to fight each other. The way that their heads move and where their weak spot is means that you're going to be connecting heads more often than not. The idea is that the borak want to swing past each other, essentially. Make one head hit a certain part of the other borak. Again, I'm trying not to spoil this. And there's something really profound about that, really poetic about it, because it works so well. But I say it's a point of no return because where do you go from here? The Rakshi are not difficult for the Toa to defeat. And the Rakshi also, interestingly, are the first characters from all of Bionicle to have posable heads. Why is that? Because by 2003, LEGO had basically given up on the mass game. I think that was part of the plan, I'm going to be honest. Here's the thing. Bionicle only needed to do one thing, and it only needed to do it once. It needed to sell well. 2001 did that. 2002 did that. Blew out all of LEGO's expectations. They pumped a lot of energy, a lot of resources, a lot of time and development into this theme, and it paid off. They didn't have to do that anymore. By the time 2003 rolled around, the story is what carried Bionicle as a franchise, not the functions per se, which is why I think in part some of the 2003 functions are a bit more lackluster than previous years. They were still cool, they were still innovative, they were still new, right? The Matoran for the first time around had functions of their own. I mean, I guess you could say that the McDonald's Matoran had a function, but I mean a geared function in this scenario. No, what I find fascinating about this theme, about this franchise, is that LEGO also knew they didn't need to keep pumping money, time, development, resources into it. They only had to do that once, and then the name recognition, the story, could propel it forward. And that's exactly what happened. I have to imagine, in part, that LEGO maybe wished they had carried on that initial story after Makuta, and I think they could have. They did, obviously, but they went into a sort of prequel, sequel. 2004 is an interesting year, but I don't think it's necessarily a year that saves the franchise. In any instance, I imagine it probably dropped sales a bit, though I can't know that for sure. Because these were new characters, a new place with new enemies, new environmental factors, I guess. Or environmental might not even be the right term, urban factors, because it's a city in this scenario. That was always one of the things that bothered me about 2004, the darkness of it, but the fan base is aging up, so I get it. And that's actually what I want to touch on. I'm talking about functions, remember. 2004 does something it doesn't really need to do. It maintains functions, but for what purpose? Here's the thing. The Toa Metru carry over the axle-based masks from the year before. I think they made sense in 2003 for the Evoki, for the Krakan, because they're legendary masks, for lack of a better term. And they were still capable of being knocked off of headpieces, but they were definitely much more difficult. However, by 2004 standards, all of the Toa had axle-based masks. I don't think that's necessary, but it's also, does it matter? Like, by 2004, is anybody playing the mass game? What did the Toa Metru do differently that makes them better or worse at the mass game? Nothing effectively. I mean, they have two weapons, I guess. Some of them have weapons with a really long range, but you'll also notice that a lot of the weapons from 2004 are very substantially different from each other. You've got the disc launcher that's mounted on a friction pin on Vakama. How is that going to function well in a mask game? You've got Wanua's shovel claws, which, while cool, while potentially being able to latch onto the back of a mask and pull it off, again, are mounted on frictionless pins. Really just undercutting the functionality of these characters, because that wasn't the point. Hell, even the dual uses of many of these weapons in 2004 wasn't the point. It was nice that they had them for the most part, not all. In a lot of ways, 2004 is a step up from 2003, but in a lot of ways it is a step down too. And that's a separate video, sure, but in terms of functionality, it's not innovative, at least not in the regards of the canister sets. The characters now have their arms mounted at an angle, which is a neat concept, but it can lead to some really awkward uses of the function as well. And it's much harder to, connect a drill to the back of the character, as you've probably seen in memes, and just have the arms flailing and swinging around indefinitely. It's hilarious, but I still find it odd, baffling, in my opinion, that was the direction that we went to. But I understand it, because again, Bionicle didn't need to be innovative at this point. It just needed staying power, and it had it. 2004 still had to have sold well. I think 2005 is probably what really soured a lot of the fan base in part, and a lot of the sales in part, because the functions in 2005 were really lackluster. I will say, and I defend the Visorak a lot, the function is fairly straightforward on the Visorak, but it is novel at the very least. It's not the most effective thing in the world. The pinchers don't have a lot of strength behind them. Knocking masks off is possible with them, but for lack of a better term, they're just, they're fine. The Hordika, though, leave a hell of a lot to be desired. And honestly, the Titans do too. There are probably a lot of people out there that really like the designs of the 2005 Titans, and rightfully so. I think they do some really interesting things. But there's another interesting thing about 2005 Bionicle. Here's the thing. 2001 gave us a lot of new mask designs. 2002 did as well, obviously with the Krana included, if you want to include those too. 2003, even, to a degree, the Evoki, the Krakan, and of course, all of the Krata. Effectively, we were always getting like 8 new masks each year, give or take, of course. 2005 is a little different. Yes, we have the Hordika heads, and you can consider those masks. You might as well, if you're going to count the Krana as masks too. But they are different. They don't connect to anything on their own, at least not without damaging the pieces. So there's one new mask for 2005, and I find that baffling because we get 3 Titans, but none of them have masks. 2004, for what it's worth, the Titans don't really have masks of their own either, like Duma does, but he's not the Titan. It's Nivok behind him, right? So, like, I get it, but it is strange to me. Not new, just strange. 2006 through 2009 abandons functions entirely. And while personally, I take this as an attack, and I think I should sue LEGO for... No, I'm joking. Here's the thing. I don't like it, but I understand why. And I don't think it's a bad thing. It's not my preference, but I can still defend the decision. I wish there were functions in 2006, 2007. 2008, there kind of were, but they were relegated to the vehicles, of course. 2009, same kind of thing there as well. In fact, many of the vehicles didn't have functions in 2009, so that was weird too, but again, I can understand it. It wasn't the point anymore. And what were the functions serving? See, a lot of people ask themselves, what would be the point of a function in later years? If you can't knock masks off, then why have it? And I would make the argument for teaching. Because the most profound moments for me in my history with Bionicle is what I've learned from Bionicle. And some of that might come from the story, some of that might come from the character development or design. But most of what I've learned from Bionicle that I can apply today to my own builds and to my own world is the functions, is how things interact. It's not worth understating just how important that interaction is. And there's a lot to love about just having characters who play into a story in a way that feels tactile, not just emotional, And it's hard to put emotion into characters from a story basis alone. But when you have functions to work with, it's, I guess, more dynamic. I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say here. The point I'm trying to get at is that it's interesting to watch the evolution of functions as they go through Bionicle's history. They evolve with the story, with the characters, and inevitably they disappear. I have to imagine some of this was because of development, right? I'm sure it takes time to develop new parts to function, or, how do these things interact and how do we build a frame around it that's small and still easy to understand for kids and whatever. I get it. It's definitely possible to do, but it's not always practical. But I would still do it. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe. Again, I am alive. And of course, as always, you can check out the Discord, Instagram, and Patreon, all of which are down in the description below. And let me know your thoughts. What is your favorite function from a canister set specifically? Or if not a favorite, which one just has the most importance to you? I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.